Something that's rolling out quite quickly now is this idea of identity going into wallets. In California, you can now pull your driving license into your Apple Wallet. And there are trials already starting with passports coming through for early trials for that. Everything's going digital. And that will have massive impacts on the economy, right? Just in terms of how that flows through. We're properly digitizing.
This is Singe and Deakins, founder of the data technology company DataSapien, who's my guest on this episode of Lives of Tomorrow. DataSapien is a company that works to keep our privacy safe online, and we're going to be talking a lot more about that. You probably don't need me to tell you that data privacy has become one of the biggest challenges of the digital era, with more and more of our personal data being collected while we're online. And for many of us, concerns are increasing about how that data is being used. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, the world's leading trend forecasting company, and you're listening to Lives of Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast about how we'll live our lives in the future. So Singe, before we discuss today's topic, please can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Sure, and thank you for having me on the show. My background, I've been doing digital innovation work for like 25, 30 years, going back to putting newspapers online in the 90s, British Airways, kind of first booking system and stuff, and then kind of originated Omnichannel in 2000, about 10 years ahead of it being a thing, with a company called agency.com, which we were huge before the dot-com bust, and then spent about 12 years in emerging market mobile, based out of Singapore, helped about 150 million people get online through their smartphones, through the noughties, had a couple of exits, and then set up a company called CitizenMe, which is all about basically kind of ended up being a 10-year research and development exercise, looking at how people engage with their data, because it's really clear that the way that we engage with data is broken. And what we've actually set up in the last year is a company called DataSapien, which is all about providing the technology to big brands to enable them to do that.
You said that the system's broken as at the moment. Can you describe why you believe it's broken and maybe why we should all be aware that it's broken?
I mean, it's clear that we've got 5 billion odd people now online. We all live in a digital world. We're all connected for the first time as almost one global citizenry. But in terms of the way that data flows work, we've ended up with kind of phase one of the internet, which was kind of getting people online. Phase two has been social, but kind of a massive kind of concentration of data into big silos with kind of people like Google and Meta, et cetera, making huge amounts of money, but basically all of our data. Through that process, our personal data has kind of become commoditized, and we've got some huge kind of inefficiencies in the industry. I mean, looking at ad tech, you've got kind of up to 80% bot fraud on advertising, just literally kind of billions of dollars, which are being kind of harvested by effectively organized crime. And in the middle of all that is us poor humans and all our data, which is kind of going into these flows, and we don't get a chance to participate. And actually, there's a world where if we could all participate, they'd just have much better outcomes for everybody. I mean, for individuals, for brands, for the platforms. And it's about kind of envisaging that future and making that happen.
So there's sort of been this transactional relationship that we have had with lots of those technology companies, some of whom you just mentioned, which is you give me this platform for free, but I'm going to hand over my data as a consequence. And through luck, design, or whatever it is, we've entered into that relationship. And in some instances, feel that, okay, well, I want this thing and therefore I'm prepared to do that. And in some cases, I think people just potentially aren't aware or have made peace with it. Do you think we've sleptwalked into this and that was the wrong thing to do? Or do you think, I mean, you're already talking sort of there is a positive way through this and out of this. Do you think that it's just now's the time to reassert that relationship?
Yeah, and I think this is just a natural evolution, right? If you look at kind of the way that our last massive kind of societal change happened with the Industrial Revolution, it took us about 200 years to get to a better state. And you had all kinds of kind of bad things happening in the early days. And we've seen the same thing with the internet, just because of the way the incentives have been set up. There aren't really any controls, regulations lagged. It's taken us kind of 15, 20 years to catch up from a regulatory point of view, which is some of that's now coming through. So I think some of it's just inevitable in terms of kind of a massive shift in the early evolution.
Okay. So what's the worst thing that can happen? So you mentioned organized crime and things like that. So if we don't harness some kind of controls of this, if we don't come up with some solutions, what's the apocalyptic version of this?
I think we're already seeing some of it. I mean, if you look at governments are now starting to roll out identity programs, and there's a fantastic program in India called Aadhaar, but unfortunately it's a centralized system, and it's holding lots of biometrics, so kind of face images and fingerprints and things in a database. And as soon as they launched it, it was hacked because it's a big honeypot. And individual IDs were on the dark web being sold for $9 a time because you can access subsidized food, et cetera. So we're already seeing this situation where there's just massive fraud happening on the internet. We're looking at kind of billions of pounds of fraud, and also the experience of using the internet is terrible, with cookie pop-ups on every site, which everyone just randomly clicks on. You don't think about.
No, you don't
going to
think
read
about
all
it.
Yeah.
Nope.
So we're adding layers of friction, but actually doesn't solve anything that it's set up to solve. If you look at, worst case scenarios for that, we end up in quite a dystopian world where we become increasingly commoditized, and our reaction to that isn't that we all become slaves; it's just we disengage. So we start spoofing our IDs. If you look at Gen Z using Snap and kind of ephemeral messaging, things evolve to kind of enable people to disengage and kind of mask their true identities, etc. And that just means you have a degradation of services. We're kind of on that path if we don't have interventions.
I don't think I have ever not accepted all on that pop-up that comes up on every single website because I'm in a hurry. I'm not going to think about it. I've accepted it for every other one. So why wouldn't I for this particular one? And then even with all those rules that have come in, I'm still getting sent emails from websites. I have one from like guns.com last week. Never clearly signed up for a website that sells guns. And yet they've got my email address and now they're spamming me.
Yeah, the wonderful world of the modern day internet.
This is quite a funny question, but because it's not a niche topic because it affects literally everyone who's online. What do you tell your friends and family that you do? How do you describe what you do in a really basic sense?
Well, what we do now is we provide really wonderful, easy personalization, which is completely privacy preserving. So you can get everything you want. You can get your jobs done by brands, but you're in complete control of what data you share and when and how that happens.
So that sounds great. So sign me up. Can I still access all those apps and websites that I'm currently using as someone who spends probably way too much time on something like an Instagram?
Absolutely. And there's no reason why every app couldn't use the same sort of technology we're building out. So the way it works is that you have a personal store of your own data and your personal AI that sits inside one of those apps. So it could be a grocery shopping app, for example. You have your own personal data store, which has your previous shopping. It has things like your step count for nutrition, maybe your socials for what kind of recipes you've been looking at. And the personal AI on device with all that completely private, secure data is then able to give you amazing meal plans and effectively becomes a nutrition coach from the supermarket. So the supermarket goes from a task of filling basket, kind of discovery and bigger basket, to becoming a much more kind of beneficial part of your life in terms of helping you with the jobs that you're doing in your life. And the critical thing for that is you have to have trust, because it's going to be the supermarket you trust that with that data and with those jobs, and they're not going to kind of do you over on the price and add additional margin on prices without you realizing it. So if you trust them to have your back effectively, both in terms of the jobs they're doing, in terms of the prices, but also in terms of looking after your data and having an AI that's working for you, you're potentially in a hugely positive position as that particular retailer, and it expands out beyond them.
Okay, so I've got so many questions. I will let you explain more, but that is available to me right now. But so I do my Ocado shop and it automatically populates my trolley basket each week. And if I forget to do it, then exactly the same stuff arrives on the Friday that I had the previous 3 weeks. Right now, if I was signed up to using your services, that basket would be giving me different choices.
Yeah, in that instance, our tech would embed into your existing app. So it'd just become an additional function of your existing app. So you'd have additional capabilities, kind of like superpowering your existing app. And then you'd have kind of options to, when you're doing your meal planning, you can look at the stuff you bought before, but you have much, much better discovery about additional items that might be interesting. Or you've been looking at lots of Thai food on socials for the last week. And the meal planner says, would you like a couple of Thai meals this week? Magically, telepathically. But you know that behind the scenes, you've connected up your socials into your personal AI.
And why is my data safer in this instance than it currently is in my relationship with said brand?
The biggest issue we have in terms of the way we structure data is it all goes into big centralized honeypots, which get hacked. Everyone gets hacked because you've got a massive incentive. If you've got the Aadhaar example, you've got kind of close to 1 billion people in a database and you can sell their data for $9 a time. Massive incentives to hack it. But if you move all the data out to individual smartphones, to individuals' own personal databases, you have to go and hack or a billion, in that instance, a billion smartphones. So the incentives just massively change. And it's also way more secure to move the AI to the data and keep the data where it is.
I use an example quite a lot, and I will not name the brand because I actually think they do many good things. But I've got 3 stepkids, and at one stage I spent all my time buying them socks because boys go through socks really quickly. And if you buy them nice ones, they then take them back to their mother's house and you're left with the school socks. They arrive in on a Friday evening. So I buy quite a lot of socks from this particular brand and other things for them. They're teenagers now. They will only dress in certain brands. They're not interested in this mass retailers. But I still get emails from them pushing kids' clothing at me. And each time it lands in my inbox, I'm like, come on, you must by now have seen that my shopping patterns have changed. I'm still spending money with you, but I'm not buying kids' socks anymore. It drives me to distraction.
Yeah, and it's the targeting we use for marketing is just, it's so old school. I mean, I'm that old that I started off in direct marketing, and we're still using the same sort of kind of techniques, right? Kind of like gathering huge amounts of data, figuring we should keep it because maybe it'll be useful at some point in the future, and then we never use it. And then the actual experience from a marketing point of view is still fairly kind of binary crap. It's could be so much better. If you actually have an understanding, if you enable people to participate in their data, you go beyond just knowing that your status changed in terms of you've stopped buying teenage boys socks.
Yeah.
But also you can actually understand when someone wants a brand message. Most of the time I'm not in the market for socks, so therefore I just want a generic brand message about the retailer. Then if I'm in the moment to buy socks, then basically my AI understands that and then can show me activation messages about, these are, let's say for me it'd be running socks. These are activation messages about kind of the new apparel you want to buy because you're in the market. And there's some research that's been done by Amazon where they or on Amazon data where some academics showed a 44 times uplift. That's 4,400% uplift in engagement if you can find that sweet spot and identify when people are actually in the need state. Because 90% of the time, 95% of the time, we're out of the market. So it's that kind of thing you can do if you have the data, but you can't have the data with either. You could do it, but creep everyone out because you're asking for so much data, or you ask them to participate. And if you have people participating with an AI that does all the heavy lifting, so it's not huge amounts of work.
That's really fascinating. Right, we've got a lot more to talk about on this topic, but I'm going to pause us there to try and get to know you a little better. So these are quick fire questions. First thing that comes into your head. Who do you look up to and why?
I've got a huge admiration for, which sounds really cliche, but kind of people like kind of Steve Jobs in terms of kind of inventing new things. In terms of kind of marketing, there's some fantastic work being done by people like kind of Byron Sharp in terms of how brands grow. Lots of discussions at the moment with people like Ritson in marketing, kind of looking about kind of new brand mix and how we communicate. So I've got a whole kind of bunch of people that I find really interesting in the marketing world.
Okay, well, let's talk about that a bit more then, because that is really interesting. When did you last give up on something?
Probably in the summer. I gave up on lunch for about 2 months.
Did you? That was like a health kick.
It's a health kick thing using Apple Health Kit. Probably because I had a new watch. So I was actually using Apple. So I was using my data, looking at all my metrics on Apple Health Kit.
Here's another one. What do you rarely share about yourself?
That I'm dyslexic, and I've discovered through some of the stuff we're doing on personal kind of insights that I've probably very, very likely ADHD as well. Which isn't surprising given that I'm an entrepreneur, because it's 1 in 3 dyslexic, massively over-indexed. But it's something I never really used to share until I kind of got into this stuff and actually met a lot of people who are going through a journey. And thankfully for me, it's not particularly debilitating now because I can type
It just so wasn't understood in that way years and years ago. And that's really interesting. Okay, which main trend do you see right now that is changing our lives?
I'm going to say it's a confluence of trends. It's, the obvious massive hyped one at the moment is AI, but it's not going to be large language models. It's going to be small language models, which are deployed on device.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, large language models have got massive issues in terms of the data they pulled in terms of the fact, they're burning rainforests just to work. But if you can actually get them working on a smartphone, they're a lot more efficient and way more privacy. They can work for you. So that's a switch we're going to see, and that combined with other things happening, like all the regulation coming through on data and AI, etc., changes in consumer sentiment as well. I think we're going to see a lot of change in the next 3 years or so.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, when are you satisfied with yourself?
Very rarely. It's terrible.
Another trait of an entrepreneur, I would have said.
So I'll cook something for dinner, which the family will be really happy with, and I will say, but what is wrong with this? What should I change next time? Yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's just I'm always looking for how can I tweak and make better.
How can you tweak to make things better? Yeah, that's not a bad thing. Okay, right, we're going to look forwards now, so we kind of understand where we are, although this is evolving sort of as we speak. What's a trend in the data space that you think is going to impact the future for all of us?
Something that's rolling out quite quickly now is this idea of identity going into wallets. And by that, I mean, so for example, in California, you can now pull your driving license into your Apple Wallet. It's called the MDL standard. And in Europe, we've got something called EIDAS 2.0, which is the same sort of thing. But anywhere in Europe, you can have a digital identity you can take anywhere. The UK, we're now looking at doing the same thing as well, even though we've got this history of identity and governments and it all being slightly problematic. So that's going to roll through. And there are trials already starting with passports coming through for early trials for that. So basically, you can go anywhere with your smartphone. And you can do pretty much everything. And then you've got identity link into your personal data with the stuff that we're doing. So you can get kind of really kind of detailed service anywhere you go, but in a privacy preserving way. Quick example of that, we've got half the teams in Istanbul. I got to the X-ray check and realized I'd left my wallet at home. I've already gone through passport control. So what do I do? And I decided to just do the whole 4-day trip with my phone, and actually it was fine. Checking out hotels, taxis, restaurants, everything is just tap and pay on an Apple Wallet. And we're now, including my boarding pass, right? So if you add in my passport, which is the only piece of paper I needed, everything's going digital. And that will have massive impacts on the economy, right? Just in terms of how that flows through. We're properly digitizing.
So mobile phone theft. I'm sitting in London, you're paranoid the entire time, signs up everywhere, who's looking at your phone. If everything is on our phone, is that opening up more potential problems? That phone goes and you are completely, I was trying to think of an eloquent word, but screwed is the one, which is, front and center, but that's putting a lot in one place.
Yeah, there's also a battery issue. So
yeah, true.
Yeah, going through check-in, and what are you going to do, right? So there's an issue with that. So for us, we basically back everything up to your iOS or Android cloud, encrypted, so you can get another phone and connect it up. But yeah, if you're traveling, you use your phone, then you've got a problem. I tend to carry a backup of a credit card. I would have a backup of my passport in my bag or whatever. But in terms of the security of it, as long as your phone, you've got proper security set up on your phone, no one should ever be able to access that data if they steal the phone. For us, you also then need to get into the app, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of the concentration, you're moving from having a massive silo honeypot where your data is going to get hacked again and again and again, to your data being in your control on your phone, and then you having a backup of it. So it's a better system overall.
We're all now carrying our little battery pack with us all the time. And again, as somebody travels and phones decharging, or it is a problem. But then there are the advantages which go with it, and not having to carry cards around, I see as a massive advantage. You're working on a whole wave of technological innovations that are very much about empowering consumers. Tell me a little bit about some of them. What can we be excited about in this space?
I think the way we're going to see so for our tech and other tech like ours, For big brands, they'll be able to move from being a transactional place you go and purchase something from. And as much as a brand manager, I'd love to believe that people love my brand because they're all loyalty card members. The reality is I just need to get a shop and buy some potatoes, right? So you can move from that more transactional service environment to almost back to the old school days. If you had a corner shop grocery store and they kind of know what you want because you go in every week and you're buying the stuff. And they know that, around this time of the year, it's a birthday in the family and they get stuff in advance. And it's almost like, God, how do you remember that, right? So that kind of really intimate kind of relationship you can build out with the brand is where we can potentially be heading to. The fascinating thing then for brands is that I think we'll end up with these things called domain apps where you'll have an industry sector where there'll be, instead of me having 15 different car parking apps, I'll have a car auto app that will do my servicing and my financing and my insurance and my parking and my electric charging and roadside assist and everything. And I'll just trust it to get on and do that. And I'll probably have another app, which is, my home app, and another app, which is my nutrition app. So as a consumer, have much deeper relationships with fewer services. As a brand, if you can be one of those services, you have an opportunity to kind of commoditize everyone else in your domain. Because you'll be the interaction layer, and then you'll have lots of other partners that will provide the services for you.
There's a first mover advantage there, I guess. There's the persuasion. And, I just think about the number of different subscriptions I've got to different TV services. And one auto-renewed yesterday, and I didn't get to it in time, and I'm really cross about it. And I'd bought it for a month because I wanted to watch this particular series, and I don't need it for anything else. But as a consumer, if all of that was in one and I was paying one subscription, and if I needed to, I could move things around, it would just be amazing. But then you've got the competition between those. You can't really see anyone at the moment prepared to be the one who's going to take the margin fall by opening up. So do you think it's going to require really innovative, long-term thinking from some brand leaders to get us to that point? Or do you think someone else will come in and sort of do it for them?
I think we're starting to see the first domain apps coming through. They don't even though they're domain apps, but Revolut would be an example. So if you're a kind of a challenger bank, the reality is if you kind of look at, say, how brands go to grow your market, you need to have big brand presence, which someone like a Barclays or an HSBC will have, or whoever, one of the big kind of high street banks. So you're naturally going to be, when someone opens a first account, the brands in their head are going to be the bigger banks. So you've got an inbuilt advantage to try and get early adoption. But if you can take your existing base, who are going to be early adopters, and then move that same customer base into new adjacent markets, that's a different path to growth. So you have people like Revolut who are moving into other financial services products, and their play then is to become a domain super app for everything financial services. And at some point they have an AI that then sorts out my finances and knows that I've got insurance due on XYZ, and they go and find the best price for me. Or they have a price comparison in there where they'll have a transparent percentage commission, which is transparent to me as a customer, but they're going and sorting out my insurance, just like an old school insurance agent would do.
It's so fascinating about this conversation is the start point is there's terrifying things happening right now and will happen in the future because of the amount of data that we share. And yet where we've got to is that we are going to share more because it's going to be more beneficial to us. And two things which should be totally opposite, and yet your whole kind of your company is based on the fact that people will do that if they genuinely believe that data is only going to be used for good and ultimately they own it.
That's exactly it. It's if they genuinely believe, if they genuinely trust the brand promise for that particular brand can be fulfilled. By me sharing more data, I can get, the brand promise can be fulfilled in a way that is much more enriching for my life. I have a better life outcome with interaction with those brands through sharing that data in a completely privacy preserving way, then that's fantastic.
Okay, we're running out of time. So just to wrap things up, are you more anxious or hopeful for the future of our data privacy?
I'm really hopeful. It's a matter of timing. I think the things that we've talked about already, like the regulation that's coming through, AI, identity, etc., actually even payments becoming more flexible and fluid. I'm really optimistic about it. I think there's only one way we can go. It's a matter of how quickly we get there. I think the threats, and especially the massive, the issues with fraud that we have that people maybe don't talk about enough, but there are just massive incentives for everyone to move to a better way of doing things.
Amazing. Really exciting. Thank you so much for your time. It's endlessly fascinating. I think this topic is so interesting. And I think for me, I've got my work hat on and how this changes, but as a consumer as well, this is something that I think we need to be informed about. And to your point, I still I accept all of the cookies because I need things fast, and just having a little bit of time to think about it's really interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Singe and Deakins, founder of DataSapien. My name is Carla Buzasi, and I'll be back with a new episode in 14 days' time. In the meantime, please catch up on our other podcast, Create Tomorrow, where we're talking about the slanguage young people are using today across social media and the strategies to effectively and authentically embed into your marketing. I'll see you next time.